Sahanavavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Welcome, Sundar Gopal Prabhu, back to the Bhagavata podcast. I'm very, very excited to have you back here, since it's always a delight to speak with you and also to learn from you. You have there's so many things within you that I'm hoping to be able to mine forth. And also I want to congratulate you for just having submitted your PhD thesis at Oxford. So that's excellent news, and we're all, I'm sure, looking forward to hearing more about that eventually. Maybe not in this podcast, but eventually.
Thank you so much, Bhrigopada Prabhu. I'm really excited and honored to be here. I'm actually very grateful to you, because through these podcasts I get to listen to the other speakers and participate in this way as well, and deepen my understanding and appreciation of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So I'm very grateful to you.
I really like this phrase here in the first canto, Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya, by regular attendance of the Bhagavata Purana and the Bhagavat devotees. That's one of the main elements of our Gaudiya Vaishnava sadhana. So I feel myself very honored to be able to speak with devotees about this Bhagavata text.
And it's today's chapter is a chapter that is one of my favorite chapters in the first book of the Bhagavata Purana. So I'm very excited.
Oh, I'm happy to hear that. I think this is one of the chapters that is it's not maybe one of the most famous ones. The prayers of Queen Kunti, or the disappearance of Bhishma, or Narada's story, or so on. We do have a very famous verse in this chapter, but the chapter as a whole is maybe less well known. So why don't you give us a short summary of what this chapter will be about?
So this particular chapter, it hits home for me on a personal level. It's very much about mortality, death, the passage of time. It's also about forgiveness. I'm sure we'll come to some of these themes. So in this chapter, Vidura returns to the city of Hastinapur after his pilgrimage, where we're told that he learns from Maitreya about Hari. He describes Hari as his shelter, Atmanogatim. And so he's welcomed home, and of course this is after the battle of Kurukshetra. Most of Yudhishthira's family has been killed in that battle, and Vidura comes home, and sometime later he convinces the elderly blind king Dhritarashtra to leave to the forest and look to his ultimate welfare. So in the dead of night, unseen, Dhritarashtra, Gandhari, his wife, and Vidura, they leave Hastinapur. They don't tell anyone. No one knows where they are, not even Sanjaya, despite Sanjaya's Divya Drishti, his divine vision that we know from the Bhagavad Gita during the battle itself. And Narada then informs Yudhishthira that they went north, and that in the forest Dhritarashtra will attain yogic perfection and will self-immolate by the power of his yoga meditation in 5 days. So Narada Rishi is not recounting the past. He's explaining what will happen in the days to come. And he tells Yudhishthira, advises him, don't go and disturb Dhritarashtra. He's preparing for his final moments.
Thank you. That's an excellent summary. And there's so many questions that all of this awakens in me. But one of the things that I was struck by right at the beginning of this chapter, already in the second verse, is the way in which the Bhagavatam jumps chronologically back and forth. There's so many things here in the first canto that anticipate things to come. Like you mentioned, Vidura, he had learned so many things from Maitreya, from discussing with Maitreya. And all of those things we'll hear about in the third canto. So we're going to have occasion to return to this later on. Why does the Bhagavatam do this? Why can't it tell the story like an ordinary storyteller would, beginning from the beginning and ending at the end? Why does it have to jump like this back and forth?
Well, it's definitely storytelling at its best, and even in so not only do you have movement back and forth in that way, but there are so many references or allusions to other well-known stories that the reader of or the listener of the Bhagavata would be aware of. So especially from the Mahabharata, and we'll probably touch on that a little bit later. But there's that feature of emboxment where you have stories within stories or narrations within narrations. And someone said that it's a little bit like Russian dolls, but it's not quite actually, because when you open a Russian doll, there's just one doll inside it. And then you open that one and there's just one. But in the Bhagavata Purana, like other epics and Purana texts, you have this feature of emboxment where a narrator will be explaining something, and within that there'll be like subplots or sub-stories and analogies within that, and sometimes quite a few layers of it. So sometimes it actually makes it difficult to understand where you are at in the various levels of emboxment.
That's true. I like this term emboxment. Where did you pick that up? Do you remember?
Trying to remember. I don't recall. Where that's from.
So I guess the intended listener or reader of the Bhagavatam would be familiar with Vidura's story and his background and so on, and be able then to catch hold of what's essential here.
Right.
And in this chapter, then his meeting with Yudhishthira and then Dhritarashtra.
Yeah, there are like some short mentions here and there. For example, there's one particular verse, verse 15, that mentions that Vidura is a manifestation of Yama, and so there's this reference to the curse of Mandavya and how Yama needed to become. He was born as a Shudra for 100 years. And so there are these different references here and there that you would only really be able to make sense of if you're aware of other texts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Prabhupada helpfully explains many of those in his purports in this chapter and elsewhere. I said earlier that there's a famous verse in this chapter. Can you guess which one I meant?
I'm imagining
there's actually a few, but there's one in particular.
I'm thinking you're possibly referring to one jiva is food for another. Is that the one you have in mind?
No, but that's also a good one. Tell us something about that verse.
Well, I think if I remember correctly, these are the teachings of Narada Rishi. So Narada Rishi, no one knows where Dhritarashtra and Vidura and Gandhari have gone to. Now, if you think about it, they're very elderly. They are the last remaining family members of that era, of that generation. And you wake up one morning and Yudhishthira goes to pay his respects and everyone's gone. No one's to be found anywhere. Not even Sanjaya knows. So in this chapter, you see one thing that I wasn't quite aware of, I suppose, is the depth of the relationship and love between Sanjaya and Dhritarashtra. So we know Sanjaya is Dhritarashtra's minister and also his charioteer. But you see the extent of the depth of that relationship, and even Sanjaya doesn't know. And then Narada Rishi arrives, and through his divine vision, he explains what has happened, and he gives some teachings. And I think it's in that place that he says that one jiva is food for another. So he's explaining the nature of the world and how death and suffering is inevitable. And there's like this natural cycle, and someone who is aware of that allows these natural cycles to take their course without lamenting.
This theme of death, of course, is quite strong in this chapter. Death and grief. When reading this chapter, I was struck by the grief of Sanjaya, who we know, of course, from the Gita, Sanjaya Uvacha, in the very first verse, and who had served Dhritarashtra his whole life. Prabhupada called him his secretary, so he had been with Dhritarashtra since he was a young boy, and must have considered himself privy to everything that Dhritarashtra did. And now suddenly his master is gone, and he hasn't even told him.
Right.
He's just disappeared. I was struck by this. What a tragedy it must have been for him.
Yeah. In verse 35, it says Sutta Uvacha, and then you find the word Sutta in the verse itself, which is obviously not Sutta Goswami referring to himself, but there he's referring to Sanjaya. And he Sanjaya is pained not to find Dhritarashtra, who's described as Atmeshwaram, his lord. So yeah, that relationship was clearly a very close one. And I think many readers or listeners, they would immediately remember various passages of the Mahabharata, and especially the Bhagavad Gita. There's a lot in the first verse of the Bhagavad Gita where Dhritarashtra also turns to Sanjaya. There are a lot of echoes. So even in the words that Dhritarashtra uses in the opening verse of the Bhagavad Gita, my sons and the sons of Pandu, this whole chapter, or the part where Vidura is speaking to Dhritarashtra, it brings all of that up again. The division that Dhritarashtra made between his sons and the sons of Pandu. Now his sons have all been killed, and also the sons of the Pandavas have been killed, and Vidura's return brings back many memories of all of the difficulties that the Pandavas had to face over the decades. When Dhritarashtra previously was in his prime, he was at the height of his power. He was emperor. He finally had the throne and gave it to. He secured his lineage through Duryodhana, something that he'd always wanted. And he was always aggrieved that Pandu had become king previously. So he got everything that he wanted. He was at the height of his powers. And when we see Dhritarashtra speaking to Sanjaya at the beginning of the Battle of Kurukshetra, that's just, that's the moment of reckoning, where his past and everything that he's done against the Pandavas catches up on him. And in fact, in the Mahabharata, that's a very significant moment because Bhishma has already fallen. So we often read the Gita on its own, and we might not always be so aware of where it fits again in that emboxment. In the emboxment of the Mahabharata, the battle has reached the 10th day. Bhishma, the great, virtually, the great warrior who can choose the time of his own death, and who had defeated his own guru, or who was stalemate in a fight with his own guru Parashuram, a manifestation of Vishnu, on that same battlefield of Kurukshetra. Parashuram wasn't able to defeat him. That Bhishma had fallen already. And Sanjaya had rushed back to Hastinapur to tell the blind king. And they're sitting down, and Dhritarashtra asks, Dharma Kshetri, Kurukshetri, what has happened? And then Sanjaya explains how the armies have lined up, how Duryodhana says, protect Bhishma, he's our chance, we're depending on him for victory, but Bhishma has already fallen. So the day of reckoning is that first verse of the Gita. So definitely, certainly for me, as a reader of this chapter, I'm brought back to the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita in particular. And one thing that this passage, this part of the Srimad Bhagavatam makes me think of is the lesson. One lesson here that I see is be very careful when you're at the height of your own powers. Never use that to harm someone else, especially those who are vulnerable or dependents, but rather try to help others, try to support them, because the balance inevitably shifts. We will not always be in a position of strength or ability or power, and that's something you see here with Dhritarashtra in his advanced age, which is described in some of the verses here.
Thank you. This is I think quite powerful, and thank you also for sharing these intertextualities between the Bhagavata and the Mahabharata and the Gita. I think this is something very important for especially perhaps for us Western readers to remember that the Bhagavata is not intended as a standalone text. That's how we heard in the earlier chapters how this is the mature realization of Vyasa's. After he has written the Mahabharata, after he has written the Puranas, then comes the Bhagavata. So he's kind of, if we think in terms of these boxes, he's created yet another box where he's taking things from his earlier texts, his earlier creations, and giving all of them a new kind of twist and a new. He's combining things in a new way, and you can't really see that unless you know some of those earlier sources to some extent. Of course, we are, as practitioners of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, we are discouraged from partially reading too many books. That's one of the things that Rupa Goswami warns us against in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. But we shouldn't take, and that's my personal understanding, and perhaps I'm influenced by having a big library behind me, but I don't think we should take that warning against reading too many books too absolutely. I think the point is studying other books partially, taking things from here and there and trying to pretend that you're really smart by quoting Heidegger or Derrida or something like this, that you've just picked up a phrase from here and there, but you haven't really understood the whole thing. Definitely reading texts like the Mahabharata, like the Vishnu Purana and so on is, I think, useful for us as sadhakas. But the verse, to get back to that, the famous verse, the famous verse that I was thinking of is a verse that is actually repeated twice in the Bhagavatam. There are a few verses like that, not too many, but a few that are repeated verbatim twice or maybe even 3 times in the Bhagavatam. And there's one of those in this verse. I think it's number 10, spoken by Yudhishthira to Vidura when greeting him after he has returned from his pilgrimage. Bhavadvida Bhagavata tirtha bhutas. So he's saying, you people, you Bhagavatas, you devotees, you are the persons making the holy places holy. I very much like that verse because, well, it's one of those that you'll hear quite often. But I very much like it also because that's been my experience with people I consider to be holy people. That in your presence you feel like you're at a holy place.
Right.
There's this a tirtha or a sacred place in Hindu tradition is primarily a place connected with water. Tirtha literally means a ford, like Go Tirtha, ox ford. So it's a place of crossing over a river, and then in a more metaphorical way, crossing over the material world into to transcendence. So a holy place is a place of coolness, of water, of change also, since water is never still, and the same kind of flowing sanctity, flowing purity, of course, is something that I personally have experienced in the association of great devotees. So that's one of the reasons why this was one of the verses that kind of struck me when reading this chapter.
Bhrigu Prabhu, I love how you explained that verse. Thank you.
I'm just repeating things I've heard from my my betters. So this chapter is also a chapter, I think, one of the themes of this chapter is to me at least, the theme of tough love. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Well, Vidura's words to Dhritarashtra are very strong. But there's a few. One thing that I was looking at is the how to put it, methods of communication in this particular chapter, where Vidura is he's really trying to convince Dhritarashtra to do something that Dhritarashtra has spent his whole life avoiding. So, I mean, if we turn for a second back to the Bhagavad Gita, both Arjuna and Dhritarashtra hear the same Bhagavad Gita. They've both seen the universal form of Krishna. So Dhritarashtra sees that in Hastinapur when they try and capture Krishna, they try and kind of kidnap him, hold him hostage.
He sees it even though he's blind?
Oh, that's a good point, actually. If I remember correctly, I'd have to check this, but I think that he is given the opportunity to see it. But I'd need to check that. That's a good point. That is a good point. But if I remember correctly, he's given a vision in that moment to see it. But I would need to check. In any event, he hears exactly the same teachings that Arjuna hears. And Arjuna represents the model student, and Dhritarashtra represents the unqualified student who hears the same information, but it doesn't lead to any personal change or transformation. So it's important to remember that Dhritarashtra is not an ordinary person in a way, because he's the son of Vyasa, who composed the Srimad Bhagavatam. So he's had the best teachers in his life: Vyasa, Bhishma, who's a Mahajana, Vidura, who's Yama, who's also a Mahajana. He's had the example of Yudhishthira, but nothing changes him. And there's one passage in the Mahabharata that's quite striking. It comes to mind, and I'm just paraphrasing here. Dhritarashtra says, I always know what is aligned with dharma and what is adharma. I always know, but I'm never able to choose the path of dharma, he says. So now he's reached the end of his life. He's in advanced age, and this chapter suggests that he's ill, he's unwell, and Vidura, who's his younger brother, has some very strong words for him. I mean, he reminds him that he's living in the house of, he's living in under the shelter of those who he had for decades tried to kill with poison, burning them alive. And I think this the strength of, or the, how to put it, Vidura's words, the strength of those words and what's behind them, you're not aware of that unless you have the understanding of the context of the Mahabharata. So all of the Pandavas' children have been killed in this battle because of Dhritarashtra, ultimately, who was given so many opportunities to avoid this battle. So Abhimanyu was killed by various warriors in an unfair way. They danced on his body. Gatotkacha, the son of Bhima, was brought down by a celestial weapon. The sons of Draupadi were strangled in their sleep in the middle of the night by Ashwatthama, the son of Drona. So all of this is, it's terrible. I don't know how to put it. It's a horrific set of events, and now the aged Dhritarashtra is at the mercy of the Pandavas, who are looking after him with, or certainly Yudhishthira is looking after him with great affection and care. So at this point, Vidura has some very strong words for Dhritarashtra. At one point he says, you're living, what does he say? You're living from a food that's given to you by Bhima, like a domestic dog, he says to him. So very strong words to just make Dhritarashtra aware of the situation that he's in and tell him this life is not meant for this. Now you need to look to your final, to your ultimate good. So yeah, strong words. But I'm reminded here of a verse in the Gita. It's in chapter 17 of the Gita, right around the middle, verse 15. It explains tapas, or discipline of speech. And the first two lines are Anudvega karam vakyam satyam priyahitam chayat. So there are 4 doors that our speech needs to go through before we can utter it, if we're following discipline of speech. So Anudvega karam, it doesn't disturb others unnecessarily. So if we say something and it just completely disturbs the other person, there's no point in saying it. Satyam, it needs to be truthful. Priya, it needs to come from a place of kindness. And hitam, it needs to be beneficial. So it needs to be helpful in that moment. So we may, what we say might be truthful, but if it's not coming from priya, if it's not kind, if it's not coming from a place of affection for the other person, then we actually don't have a right to say it, according to the Gita. So, but we see with Vidura that he is speaking directly, so truthfully, but he also has affection for Dhritarashtra, and what he's saying is necessary and beneficial for him. So it is a kind of tough love, but I like that you said tough love, because there is love there.
Mm. I'm reminded again of the Gita, but of a different place. In the beginning of the 2nd chapter, when Krishna starts speaking to Arjuna, and I don't know if you had that same experience, but when I read the Gita the first time, I was completely charmed by Arjuna's words at the end of the 1st chapter. That wow, this macho warrior has finally understood how things are, that we have to realize that violence can never take you anywhere, and he's prepared to give up his own life, and and to walk away from everything and throw down his magical weapons, and what a wonderful person. And then Krishna says, "Get up, you weakling! Klaibyam mas magamapartha. Don't be such a eunuch. Get up and fight." And I was completely shocked. This is supposed to be his friend, and he's insulting him in this way. And of course he's doing it out of love, just like Vidura here, to shake Arjuna out of that ultimately selfish feeling that he had fallen into. Of course, it's good that he doesn't want it. If he wanted to, he would be some kind of psychopath. But it doesn't mean that he shouldn't fight, nevertheless, because it's not everything is about him. There's bigger things going on, and I very much get that feeling with Vidura here as well, because he's speaking to him in a very insulting way, like you mentioned, calling him a dog eating the remnants of the master. But he very much wants his benefit, for him to give up this kind of paralysis that he's fallen into, and finally kind of get up and do something. And of course, the beautiful thing is when Vidura, when Dhritarashtra leaves, he's accompanied by his wife Gandhari, as always, but Vidura goes as well. It's not just that he's telling him that it would be good for you to go to the forest and I'll stay here and enjoy the luxuries of the palace, but he also goes with him. That really, to me, that kind of clinches the part of this being tough love. It's not just him being nasty. He wants something good for Dhritarashtra, but he feels that he needs to shake him a bit. This last part, this kind of speaking in such a heavy way, maybe that's something it's not really popular in our culture nowadays. Certainly myself, I would never dare speak like that to anybody, let alone a student. But maybe sometimes it would be needed.
Yeah, right. I am reminded of various times that different rishis have addressed Dhritarashtra, and sometimes using very strong words. There's a certain fearlessness about rishis, and Vidura in particular. I mean, prior to the Battle of Kurukshetra, he spoke very directly to Dhritarashtra as well, to the extent that Duryodhana insulted him, and Vidura leaves. So, but this, I've always been I admire the directness and the ability the willingness to speak with complete honesty to an emperor like that. We find that also, like much later, of course, at the time of Alexander the Great. There is a story about him, how one particular sage addressed him in that way, and it reminded me of how the rishis and Vidura addressed Dhritarashtra in such with such honesty.
Did I ever tell you, Sundar Gopal Prabhu, about the time when your Guru Maharaj spoke heavily to me like that?
You've never told me, no.
When I was doing the fieldwork for my PhD, that's like 25 years ago or so, I was interviewing various Gaudiya Vaishnava gurus. And I was asking some of the leading disciples of Srila Narayana Maharaj if I could get an interview with him. And everybody said no, it's not possible, he's too busy. But then somebody arranged for what I thought was a one-on-one interview in the temple in Sevakunj. And I went there at the appointed time. And it turned out it wasn't a one-on-one interview. but it was a situation where Srila Narayana Maharaj was sitting on his seat, and all the disciples were there, kind of as an audience, as an audience to our discussion. And I was there, a little boy of 20 something, with my list of questions, and hundreds of people then looking on. And I started asking my questions, and Srila Narayana Maharaj smashed all of them, to the great delight of everybody present. And his point in all of the kind of smashes that he gave was that you're asking questions from a theoretical academic viewpoint, and that's like trying to understand the taste of honey by licking the jar. I think he used that example, which others have used as well, of course. And it wasn't particularly pleasant for me, as I'm sure you can imagine. But even in that situation, with hundreds of people laughing at me, even in that situation, in the midst of that situation, I realized that what he's doing is he's speaking really to his disciples more than to me. And in fact, afterwards, after our discussion, I sat down and spoke with somebody, I guess a bit shell-shocked. And then he came past. He was walking there with his secretary, and he stopped and he had a chat with me for a little while, to make sure that I understood that he didn't do anything kind of out of ill feeling or anything like that. So it was a very powerful experience for me of the kind of tough love that Dhritarashtra is getting in this chapter. So I can kind of sympathize with Dhritarashtra a little bit. But I'm wondering also about something, and that is, you mentioned that he has gotten these kind of teachings before, but he never understood them. What's different now? How come he gets it now, finally? I don't know if I did.
It's interesting you say that, because I was asking myself
Maharaj.
the same question about, what is it about this time? I think that one part of it may be that now you see, previously when he received these teachings from different rishis, he was at the height of his powers. And he was undisputed emperor, even though despite his blindness, his sons were next to rule. He had accumulated so much wealth, including Indraprashta, the fabulous wealth following the Rajasuya Yagya of Yudhishthira. All of that was in his possession now. And it's very difficult to make good choices in that condition. I mean, it's interesting because here you have Yudhishthira in this chapter as well, who's the counterpoint to Dhritarashtra. Yudhishthira makes the good decisions from that position of power and wealth, but Dhritarashtra wasn't able to. But here there's no choice. It talks about his teeth are all loose. He's facing illness. He's in advanced. He's reaching the end of his life now, and there's no real alternative now. It just becomes plainly obvious. So Vidura's words just give him that last push to try and do something truly meaningful in an ultimate sense with his life. I think that might be the difference here. I find this particular chapter like really poignant. It hits home on a personal level. I guess it's because I'm 50 this year, and I know many might think 50 is not very old, but it's half a century. So it's a number that, at least for me, it hits home in a special way. And so this chapter for me is very much about looking back on your life and then looking forward to what remains, and having the courage to take steps however difficult, to pursue the ultimate good. In other words, related to the self and not the illusory stories we live out in the world. Not the kind of story that Dhritarashtra expresses in the opening verse of the Gita, but to go beyond that and do something that's truly, truly has meaning in an ultimate sense, beyond these small human stories of friends and enemies and what's mine and what's I and mine and so on. So that's, I think that's why this particular chapter has special meaning for me.
I wanted to ask you about that because you mentioned before that this chapter hits you on a personal level, and I can understand what you're saying because I turned 50 a couple of years back, and for me that was it was a very profound experience. I mean, in a sense, it's just a number, isn't it? But it is also it's a number with lots of significance. We hear these verses about panchordvam vanam gachet. At the age of 50, one should go to the forest, like Dhritarashtra here. But while that may not be so realistic for me at the moment, 50 really is an age where you realize that you don't have that. You've lived most of your life already. In my family, men don't become very old, so I probably have about 20 more years of life left. So I need to become more serious about my life. That's very much how I felt at that time, and that stayed with me to some extent since. Not in a I don't feel kind of anxious, but the sense of urgency in a way.
Sense of urgency and a kind of a focusing of intent. There's not, I don't know, in my 20s it seemed like time, there was no end to the amount of time that I had. And I could work on any particular project. It didn't matter. I didn't need to be so selective because it just seemed like an endless supply of time. And then for me at 50 now, you see the horizon, and you realize, or I realize, that there's not much time actually. The decades seem to go swifter. Like 1 year was a long time when I felt like a long time in my 20s. Now a decade passes by like the blink of an eye.
This theme of time, of course, comes up in this chapter as well. Krishna is compared to time, like he does in the Gita. Again, if we want to make another Gita parallel, in the form of time, Krishna has come to take all of us away. I think it is Narada who tells Yudhishthira towards the end of this chapter. Do you want to comment something on this?
I don't have any immediate thoughts on it, but certainly this chapter is very much connected to the passage of time. So you see that also in just in the various protagonists in this chapter, and how one is, so when Vidura arrives, this huge battle has taken place. Everything has shifted. Power has shifted. Most of family and kinsmen have perished. So it's a completely different world that Vidura steps into when he comes back from a pilgrimage. He's kind of insulated from that for some time, and then he comes back into a wholly different world. And one of the first things that Yudhishthira says is, he says, the sacred tirthas become sacred because of you. So the verse that you mentioned. And then he also says, remember, he goes back to the past. Remember, like a bird, like the wings of a bird, you sheltered us. You protected us all those years ago when we were in danger of being killed by Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra. You saved us from fire, from poison. So there is definitely this looking back at time. And then you find Vidura and Vidura speaking in the present moment. And then you have a look towards the future. So even when Narada Rishi comes and explains where Dhritarashtra is, he's not speaking about something that's happened in the past. He's saying, now Dhritarashtra, in 5 days, he's already in the north. He's absorbed in yogic meditation, Ashtanga yoga. He's controlled his breath. He's nearly there in his practice. In 5 days, he will self-immolate by the power of his yogic meditation. So you certainly have this, time is a very important feature of this particular chapter. And that's why I say that the Srimad Bhagavatam is just magnificent on so many different levels, but also on the level of its storytelling and the themes that are interwoven in these chapters.
Another theme that's interwoven into this chapter is the theme of viraha, of separation. The one that Sanjaya is feeling, the one that Yudhishthira is feeling, but also there's a hidden viraha here, because Vidura knows that Krishna and the Yadus have left this world, but he's not saying it. So he could come with this terrible kind of a thunderclap of a news to Yudhishthira, but he refrains from speaking about it.
Bhrigupada Prabhu, I am so impressed because I know you didn't. You didn't read the chapter in advance, but you have such a good memory. It's really impressive.
Well, I did read it in advance. I just as a kind of background for the listeners, I had misunderstood which chapter we were supposed to discuss, so I had to quickly read up on this while Gokul and Sundar Gopal figured out the lighting and so on. So I did read it.
Very swiftly. That's impressive. Yeah, when I saw that passage, Bhrigupada Prabhu, I went straight to Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan Prabhu's Vaishnava Nandini commentary because I wanted to see what he would say there. And I was struck by that as well. And it did also remind me of that verse, Anudvega Karam Vakyam, not to say things that will simply just completely disturb someone else. And Baladev Vidyabhushan Prabhu explains that news would have just broken everyone. And so he decides not to mention that. Yeah, that's a very interesting passage there in the chapter. I was wondering,
of course. Yes, do go on. I'm sorry that I just interrupted.
I was wondering, could we spend a little bit of time also discussing Yudhishthira?
Yes, of course.
In this chapter, all my favorite kind of protagonists, you have Vidura, Yudhishthira, Narada Rishi, Sanjaya, and Dhritarashtra. It's Yudhishthira. One thing that really struck me is how Yudhishthira, despite everything that has happened, he doesn't hold any resentment towards Dhritarashtra. And there's even one verse 31, where he's referred to as, and this is well known, he's referred to as Ajatashatru, one whose enemy is unborn. So that really struck me. And you see that also, we spoke about, Bhrigupada Prabhu, you had mentioned how Sanjaya has this close relationship with Dhritarashtra. But I was very struck also by Yudhishthira's reaction, which Yudhishthira is genuinely being filled with anxiety and aggrieved at Dhritarashtra and Vidura as well, having and Gandhari having just disappeared. And he says, O son of Gavalgana, where is our Tata, our father, who's stricken with blindness and age? And his genuine anxiety and concern and affection for Dhritarashtra is something that really struck me. One verse a little bit later also, he says, when our father Pandu passed away, then these two, they protected us like children from dangers. And where have they gone? So Baladeva Dibhuchan Prabhu, he says that Yudhishthira remembers the assistance that Dhritarashtra gave. And so he remembers Dhritarashtra's virtues and the good things that he had done, and lets go of the injustices and the faults. And I don't know, as humans, we tend to be the opposite. Certainly, it's very easy to be the opposite of that. We very easily don't remember those times when someone has helped us, when someone has been kind to us, when someone has done something or has a quality that is really quite striking. It's a virtue. We tend much more to remember someone's faults, or those moments when someone we may feel has been unjust to us or has harmed us in some way. So yeah, that really struck me in Yudhishthira. Now, obviously, it's not something that you can't mimic that. I don't think it's helpful to pretend to be Yudhishthira. I think it's important to be honest. If we have a feeling of having been hurt by someone, for example. But I think Yudhishthira can inspire us. And Yudhishthira, his example, can help us become less absorbed in our own small human story, which can make us very easily like Dhritarashtra and think in terms of those who help us and those who harm us, friends and enemies, and so on. So I'm very inspired by Yudhishthira, and yeah.
A counterpart to Yudhishthira here, of course, is Bhima, who doesn't come across in a very nice way in this chapter. To be honest, he's mocking his fallen enemy. In a sense, I mean, he's personally responsible for killing. I don't remember. Did he kill all of Dhritarashtra's sons?
He did, yeah.
or most of them? But he certainly hasn't let go of any sense of hate towards him.
Well, I have a question for you about that. I have a question for you. So we don't ever hear Bhima himself speaking. And so this is Vidura saying that. And I wonder if, we know from the Mahabharata that Bhima tends to hold on to things. And he has he's got quite a strong anger. When Draupadi is not able to, she knows to go to Bhima. Like when Kichaka was harassing her, she knew, don't go to Yudhishthira, go to Bhima. But here also, it's Vidura saying it. Bhima is giving you food like as if you're accepting it like a domestic dog, accepting food from its master. But we don't actually hear Bhima himself. So I wonder whether Vidura is strengthening the point. I don't know.
Well, in the Mahabharata, Bhima certainly does say quite hurtful things to Dhritarashtra here, and I'm thinking maybe there's an amount of narrative strategy here, of course, to showcase Yudhishthira's attitude and Yudhishthira's example. And you are, of course, Sundar Gopal, you're a deep thinker, but you're also a practical thinker. Do you have some advice for those of us who tend to not always be able to see only the good in others? Are there any kind of practices that we could do to help develop that kind of an attitude that Yudhishthira personifies here?
I can tell you about something that something that I do or have noticed, and I think this will be fun to share because you and I are similar in a few ways. But one way is that we both have a dog at home. So I have a dog named Prem, and he's a service dog. So Mohini's father has Alzheimer's. Advanced Alzheimer's, and this little gentle dog really helps with that. But there's one thing I've noticed that really struck me about Prem, and I say this because also in the Bhagavata Purana, in the 11th book, we hear about how there's an effulgent Brahmin who learns from 24 different teachers, which include the wind, the ocean, the hawk, the arrow maker, and so on. So there are valuable lessons to be. There are teachers all around us, and valuable lessons to be learned in everything around us, in our environment. There's one thing I noticed about animals, about dogs in particular. Well, first, they have this incredible ability. So I've seen with Prem that when he is in a kind of not a fight, but there's two dogs barking at each other. So he's like under attack a little bit, and he doesn't provoke it. It just happens. A larger, more aggressive animal does something like that. Then as soon as that is over, he just shakes himself. And it's done. It's done. He doesn't hold on to it. And I don't know, as humans, we can hold on to things, for sometimes years. I mean, I imagine we can even hold on to things for lifetimes. You see that also with when two dogs don't like each other, then they'll bark at each other. And but when they go their separate ways, they don't continue barking. And maybe as humans, we're the opposite. When there's someone that we don't get along with, when we're faced with them directly, we're polite. And as soon as they leave, we begin our speaking, our barking about them. So in some ways, animals are in some ways, there's something to be. I feel there's something to be learned there, and so I try and take lessons where I can, and learn from that. That life is short. To become absorbed in our small human story and live that out, we then end up like Dhritarashtra. And then at the end of our life, when we're not in the best position and we're facing the same kind of horizon that Dhritarashtra is facing, then we have to scramble and see what we can do with the time that's remaining, because we've been so absorbed in all of these conflicts and kind of very human but petty problems. So in this verse, in this chapter, Vidura speaks about Narottama, the best human. The best human is someone who thinks ahead. Vidura says, who thinks ahead, and from the earliest position plans ahead for one's ultimate journey, one's ultimate welfare.
Thank you. I think this was very helpful and interesting. There are two more persons I would like to speak about in this chapter, but one of those is Gandhari. We'll hear more about her in the next chapter, so maybe I can save that for the next episode. But Narada, is the second one. Narada is kind of like the Deus ex machina in the Bhagavatam. Whenever there's some unresolved situation and people don't know what to do, then Narada comes suddenly. And in this case, he just comes with the information. But do you have any thoughts about the kind of narrative use of Narada here? That why does the Bhagavatam always need to bring in him in a situation like this? How come it's not Sanjaya who through his Divya Drishti can realize what's going on?
Right. I would have to go back to the Mahabharata and actually, and I've been meaning to do this when I reread this chapter, is to see whether Sanjaya's Divya Drishti is only for the duration of the battle. It's a blessing by Vyasa just for the duration of the battle. Because here, Sanjaya is completely lost. He has no idea. And that's the poignancy of part of the kind of the emotive impact of this of this chapter, that someone who's been the eyes for Dhritarashtra, literally, not just in describing what occurs at Kurukshetra, but also who would hold him and bring him around. He was literally the eyes of Dhritarashtra. He doesn't know where his master has gone. So it requires then someone who does have the ability to see. And as you mentioned, that's Narada Rishi who comes here. Narada Rishi you talked about strong love. Narada Rishi has some very strong words as well here. And here these are directed to Yudhishthira. He doesn't want Yudhishthira to go chasing after Vidura, Dhritarashtra and Gandhari. And so he speaks about the nature of the self in verses that are in some ways quite similar to some of the verses in the Gita. And at the very end, he tells Dhritarashtra not to go into the forest looking for them. And Baladev Vidyabhushan Prabu's explanation, I think, is brilliant. He says, he expresses what's said in between the lines, so to speak, Baladev Vidyabhushan Prabhu. So he says, Narada Rishi says, don't be an obstacle. Why does he say that? Because Yudhishthira may want to bring Dhritarashtra back. And then he says, in 5 days' time, he will self-immolate. And he says that because Yudhishthira may want to go to the forest and retrieve the body. So for that reason, Narada Rishi tells him in advance that the body will be ashes. There won't be anybody to find for kind of a state funeral. And then Narada Rishi also mentions, and here, of course, Narada Rishi is looking into the future, so he's not looking into the past. This is a forward-looking vision. Narada Rishi says, and Gandhari enters the fire too, willingly. So Yudhishthira might want to go to the forest and, okay, never mind, Dhritarashtra has perished, but let's bring Gandhari back to the palace. So he's saying, don't do that, you won't be able to. And then the final point, Narada Rishi then discloses with with a mixture of joy and lamentation, Vidura will depart for the holy places. So he's saying to Yudhishthira, don't go to bring Vidura back, because when you arrive there, Vidura too will be gone. So yeah, it's fascinating. You spoke about the theme of time, and that's where Narada Rishi very much plays an important role in the Bhagavata Purana in relation to time. His connection with time is very interesting as a theme.
There's on Sanjaya, it's interesting that, as you say, his Divya Drishti was taken away. According to the Mahabharata, it happened after the death of Duryodhana. So he doesn't have it anymore. But at least in the Mahabharata, he goes then to find his master in the forest, and he's there when Dhritarashtra dies, and then he's the one who carries the news then to rishis elsewhere, and after that then he himself goes into the Himalayas. He goes on that final journey to the north, and I don't think we hear any more about his final hours, but he also kind of exits the story in a similar way. So we have many exits, many ends in this chapter, which of course is quite interesting, because this chapter will also then eventually, with the exit of Yudhishthira and the Pandavas in the upcoming chapters, the focus will then turn to Parikshit, the main hero of the whole Bhagavata. But I think it's time for us to exit as well. I've immensely enjoyed speaking with you, Sundar Gopal Prabhu, about this chapter, and I'm very happy because I knew there was depth here, and I knew there were many things to speak about, but I couldn't imagine how much beautiful wisdom you've been able to bring out here. So I'm very thankful to you for this discussion, and I hope you'll be back for many more episodes in the future, like 10 or so. What do you think?
I very much look forward to it, and in the meantime I will be following the other speakers, the other episodes very closely. I'm very grateful, Bhrigupada Prabhu.
Thank you. Radhe Radhe.